the long-awaited moment to start for this DMAx, brought to you by the collective and MB96. So today, shall we be talking about? Shall we be talking about, does sex sell? And I know we have a bevy of different people from the industry, creatives, brand people, photographers, etc. But I will start by introducing our lovely panel. One individual is joining us from far away, but is here in spirit. But I think we start from, usually it's ladies first, but we'll start with Njagi. Many of you know Brian Njagi, and it's scary to think what Brian might go on to achieve, given what he's already accomplished in his 10 short years in advertising. Over 40 regional and global accolades, a judge at the One Show, Lorries. He does have a talk for the Lorries coming up. When is it? Next Friday, for anyone who wants to listen. He's one of the next creative leaders. He's a young gun. And most importantly, out of all that, he's the current chairperson for the DMA committee. He has worked for everyone: Netflix, Coca-Cola, Airtel, Safaricom, Tusker, Total. Are there any we are not allowed to mention? And before his current role as creative director at the bar, he was leading creative output at DigiTribe. Away from ads, he is an avid theater buff. He is a brand person who is out here trying to get us to all drink Jabba tea. A dad to both humans and two dogs called Boy and Caesars. As a copywriter, we'll discuss how much thought went into that. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Brian. Next to him is Wamboi Mwangi. She is in strategic communications and digital marketing specialist. She's been around for 14 years, despite not looking like she's been working for more than a few days. And she's shaped narratives from Sambaza Furaha, M-Pesa at 18, the Safaricom Ethiopia launch, Johnny Walker 200-year celebration, and with her sharp eye for storytelling and a deep understanding of audience behavior, she designs integrated campaigns that bridge culture and commerce. So whether you're looking for brand positioning, narrative development, cross-market communications, or what's good in Ethiopia, Wamboi is your person. Some snaps for Wamboi. Second last, but definitely not least, is Jeff Omwaki. So I don't know who has watched MTV Sugar so far? Mashariki? You have Jeff to thank for that. He is currently leading the youth-led programming at MTV Staying Alive Foundation. And MTV Sugar, which is a great show, you should all check it out, is helping young people reimagine power, identity, and possibilities through stories that reflect them. And of course, that makes him perfect for the panel. In the same life and in a different life, he worked in agency. He's a storyteller, strategist, program lead, and has spent more than 10 years working at the intersection of advertising, media, and culture in East Africa. So if you've seen work from the past 10 years from Smirnoff, KFC Kenya, NCBA, and even some things like K1 Clubhouse, Jeff did touch a little bit of that. Snaps for Jeff from work. Oh, this feels like a poetry club, eh? Last but definitely not least, a man who is known across borders, not just as a creative professional, but a cultural bridge, a storyteller whose narratives transcend borders and bring African stories on a global stage. You might have seen him at Cannes. You might have seen him at Lorries, at the DMAs. If there's a stage with advertising and marketing, he's probably been there. And he's been changing stories across 34 African countries by fishing deeply for rooted local insights, using interactions in everyday settings like local markets, bars across sub-Saharan Africa. And he is the owner of this lovely space that we're using today, Mr. Alemu Emuron. So like I said, today is a topic. Me, I'm just that guy. And myself, Mike Kiruthi. I think me and Brian Njagi go a little way back. Started our career after a few years after him, creative director at MB96. And given the recent and the historical going-ons of this topic of sex and marketing, how it has evolved, some people have said it has devolved. I will be hosting this panel today. And I think with that introduction, we can start off with saying we all agree that sex taps into a very deep evolutionary and emotional driver. However, in our industry and against cultural norms, um, very many things take a backseat. A kiss in a commercial is taken down, but we asked to do very provocative work. And with the panel today, I want to start with Njagi, and if you can share a campaign where sexual appeal has driven marketing results and marketing, that would be a great point to start.
Thank you, Mike. I suspect I know why Mike asked me to answer that question first. But what I usually believe in is sex on its own is not a driver of sales or a driver of brand appreciation. I think you have to tease sex. If you go through the full course of sex, like showing the full thing, it doesn't usually bring brand appeal or sales. So a good campaign for me that has teased the idea of it, that I think delivered, is one that also caused a lot of discussions online in the past 2 months. And I suspect that's why Mike then asked me to answer that question. There's some work my team at the bar did for Furniture Palace. Sleep with Nick, sleep with Terry, sleep with all those other names, right?
Is there anyone who hasn't seen that campaign? Hey,
Okay, great.
captive audience.
Yeah, we are selling. And I think the reason it caused so much conversations and a bit of controversy, especially on our marketing industry side, was because of the idea that people thought it was inferring. Because we never said, have sex with Nick, you know. No one ever said that. We just said, sleep with Nick. And the reason I think it worked is because, like I said, it teased the idea. But also, if you think about it strategically, we all have nicknames for the things we love. What do you call your car, Mike?
Agua.
Agua. What do you call your phone? Does it have a name? What do you call your couch? You guys don't give your, but at least all of you have a name for your car, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Anyone who has a car gives them, you give names to your puppies as well, right? Things you're affectionate towards, you give them names because you want to associate with them even more. So mine, for example, is called Mando. So the insight came that, and this data and statistics, more than 50% of Nairobians are single. How many of you here are single? Msiogope, mnaweza pata watu wenu hapa leo.
Take this as an opportunity.
You're going to say. Okay, if I ask you when the lights are switched off, I know most of you, half of you at least will raise your hands up, right? So more than 50% of Nairobians are single. Whether it's official or unofficial, I do not know. Which brought us another insight. Sleep with Nick, sleep with Terry. For single people, it makes sense because ultimately when you're going to bed, you're going to your bed. That's the thing you're sleeping with. So if you have a relationship with it, it makes sense for you. So like I said, the idea of teasing sex works better, and I think that campaign for me worked because it teased it, but it never went ahead to show it. There's another one McDonald's did, but it's a simple poster. It had the burger, the McDonald's burger silhouetted out, and the silhouette looked like a face of a human being. And of course, McDonald's tagline is,
I'm loving it.
I'm loving it. So there was this guy who was going to reach out for the burger, and the silhouette gave you ideas of, you know, what was going to happen. But then when you saw the burger, you're like, it's just a burger, right? Again, another way you tease without actually pursuing the whole thing to its logical conclusion. So I think teasing sex tends to work as long as you're not crass about it, as long as you're not distasteful about it. In my opinion, it tends to work. The idea of teasing it, not the idea of
not going the full way.
Going the full way, yeah.
And to Omboy and Jeff, any that have misfired or had to be taken down in that stress, because they were either too sexual, that you think this was actually something brave?
So we were actually just talking about this before we started. There's a fresh fry ad. I can't recall from how far back. Maybe the 2000, the Pwani, yeah, fresh fry Pwani oil. And from the start, it's just what's happening? You know, when in the kitchen, you've come home from work. On one side, it's preparing the meal. So there's the whole, I think there was lobster or something. On the other side, this guy's removing his shirt. And then awkward cuts of like just the eyes. And so by the end of that 30 seconds, you're like, what is happening exactly? So I don't know if it was taken down because it's still on YouTube and still on the Pwani Oil YouTube account. I would assume it's still an asset that they are proud of. But I think it missed the mark in terms of what's going on. Are we targeting this for like couples, for dual income, no kids type of situations? Is it romantic dinners? What's happening? Yeah.
It leaves people both confused and intrigued.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not 100% sure that there's actually misfire. And the reason I say that is because different ads serve different purposes. So even with, I'm glad Brian is here because he can actually tell us if the Furniture Palace ad worked, right? Because I might not be planning to go to Furniture Palace, but guess what? All of us, okay, not me personally, but most of us in this field have talked about it on LinkedIn. You've got your opinion in your WhatsApp groups. And at the end of the day, guess what has happened? It's top of mind awareness that Furniture Palace did not have before. Same goes for Pwani Oil. Same goes for, what's the one that was pulled down the other day with cartoons? Kleenex, right? So that was very sexual. Yeah, it was a whole cartoon display, whatever. But again, when we're talking about it, are they selling more? So what is the definition for me of misfire? Because there are some that are converting, there are some that are creating awareness. Either way, their numbers on social or their website are going up. Foot traffic is moving.
What is the measure of success?
What is the measure of success? Yeah.
And as someone who works on the strategy side of things and also almost developing that, how do you make sure that it doesn't misfire? Are there any warning signs? The creative team has taken one idea and you're saying, hey, this might work, or how do you make sure it just lands on strategy?
Okay, one, like you said, insights. Insights help. But insights help if you are willing to educate your client. Yeah, a lot of times when you find, like, let's say Kleenex, yeah, those guys, they probably didn't advocate. Okay, sorry if you're in the room. You didn't fight or explain to your client very well about the risks, yeah? Because by the time you're putting something up that can be easily misconstrued sexually, then you should tell your client, like, if your goal is conversion, this is not going to happen. What is going to happen is awareness. What's going to happen is consideration. Your billboards will be up for 2 weeks at best. I think I'm revealing my age here, but I think a while back, probably just before COVID, there was GA, which came up with Shit Happens, the scanner team, right? Yo, fire everywhere. Ooh, ooh, pull the billboard. I don't need to see a toilet. You know, and guys were like, okay, but we're not using curse words. We've put an asterisk, but the billboard was still put down. But, you know, you had the leadership coming in and saying, not even scanner leadership, GA leadership came in and said, okay, you know what? But you were talking about it. And our numbers have upped. So I think if you're willing to educate the client to some extent, and you're working with insights, and you're agreed on, okay, let's ride this out as long as we can, you can do almost anything. Now, appetite for risk for clients, is it going to be?
Clearly, Pwani will have a high appetite for risk. I want to raise this question to both Jeff and Alemu, starting off with Emuron. Many a time it's told that as Africa, as Kenya, we as a society do not, this is non-moral, right? We have moral grandstanding, as it were. But as people who've worked on either campaigns or across multiple nations, does that ring true? I mean, how is the same audience watching Game of Thrones, watching HBO shows, not able to take up marketing that uses sex as a device?
Great question, Mike. And I think the way you framed it, or what you referred to it, is the most accurate. It's moral grandstanding. Now, I speak as someone who's had at least 3 or 4 campaigns banned for being sexual in one way or the other. And there's time where I'll be very honest, especially when I was younger, I was using sex the wrong way in advertising. It was crass. It was not, as Jaggy said, whereby it was done in a classy way. It was done where there's a story behind it. Because again, sex, when it's just skin, is cheap, right? But then when there's a story to it, when it's more seduction, there's people who came out and said, oh, this is sexual, this is blah, 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 etc. At the end of the day, those are the pervs. The truth is, society, when you hold up a mirror, it's like if someone drops, sorry, excuse how crass this statement is going to be, if someone drops a fart in that room right now, and someone says someone farted, probably the guilty party will be like, what are you saying? They'll be the loudest. They'll be the loudest person. So it is the pervs who come out and say, oh, this is hypersexual. Bro, when you look at Njadi's campaign, for example, I don't see the hypersexuality. What I saw was clever writing. And again, I could be wrong. But the one thing is also as a parent, I am 100% certain that the thing that would sexualize my kids is not a billboard which says sleep with name, which is the name of a mattress or a bed. It is a content I will be consuming. I was telling someone in the office the other day, I had my son use a curse word the other day and I got vexed and I was upset. I was like, yo, where are you learning these words from? And he said, but when you're on the phone with Uncle Steve, I had you say that. And then when mommy was watching this show where there was violence happening, I had someone say that particular word. So when people blame advertising for the sexualizing of society, they forget the other influences. They forget all the content. They forget all the music videos that kids are watching. These kids twerking in different compounds, in different estates in Nairobi. And that's not because of an advert that they saw. It's because their parents were on TikTok. It's because their parents are watching a certain music video. So for me, it's moral grandstanding. And it's laziness in blaming advertising for society's moral decay. Society is immoral. It is what it is. Societies have been immoral from time immemorial. But advertising shouldn't be blamed for that. And people who are trying to be brave and take risks, because again, sexualizing is a risk. It could go very, very bad, or it could go well. In the case of brands like Calvin Klein, in the case of brands like Axe that have used it for years, in the case of Old Spice, that brand was dead in the water, and then they used sex and seduction to rejuvenate what ideally was a failing product. So it's moral grandstanding, in my opinion. However, there is merit in some cases where people are being crass with it and being lazy with how they put it together. And I've done that before. I've messed up and done a very crass sexual innuendo campaign. But there are times where it's been necessary and it's been done with class. And in those cases, still, I've had a first lady of a particular country call a TV station and say, pull that ad down. And I'm like, yeah. Well, you're moral grandstanding. So that's my point of view now. It's the clubs who have an issue and not the society that has an issue.
All right. Jeff, as someone who speaks to very, very young people, what is your take on this?
I think for what we've seen, so it's not that the market, it's not that Kenyans or East Africans mind, the sexy or the idea of sex, but what we have seen and what we've even been called out for, like when we've gone out to the field to do research, is it's when you miss the nuance. It's laziness, quote unquote. Yeah, it's in the laziness in the storytelling. And I like what Emuron has said around sex within the purpose of a story, within a wider intention. So case in point, like for us on a media brand like Sugar, so before any sugar is written, it's the same model across anywhere there's sugar. There's a whole nationwide research, and it's not just research in terms of reviewing material that's already out there. It's going to all the different counties, the different wards, the different towns, and doing a number of focus groups, talking to young people 15 to 24 about what they think about sex, about what is their reality about sex. And then it's those stories, sometimes word for word, sometimes an exact character is shaped based on somebody we met in the field, is what ends up on the show. And I think that's what has even contributed to the success of a media brand like Sugar. And it's proven that the issue is never sex. The issue is in how it's used as a device in storytelling, how it's used as a device for whatever objective that you're trying to go for. So I think that's usually where guys tend to miss the mark.
Okay. And now, clearly, we are all pro, let's do it. But then, a question I have is we've never seen a billboard of like a buff man without a shirt taken down. But when Sheila Moniga was on a billboard for Vaseline, was it less than 2 days? It had to be taken down. So, what lines must we cross? And this cuts across. And is there a nuance in gender? Right? Are men more vulnerable to being susceptible to ads that use sex as compared to women, where now it's a bit more touchy? Across the board, you can start us off.
It's a norm thing. It's a society thing. It is, and I think the research also shows it. They're the accusing finger. How do they say? The accusing finger of a man will always find a woman. It's a thing. It exists. So I think it starts by the conversations we're having in this room and us choosing to boldly push it in our work that no, this ad, we've chosen to use Sheila Moniga because it serves this purpose, because it's contributing to the credentials of the product we're trying to sell, and not what all of you are trying to paint this as. So honestly, it's a long journey because norm change doesn't happen overnight. We will not do 1, 2, 3 campaigns and then suddenly the public national opinion on how men are viewed versus how women are sexualized changes. But it is something that we need to consistently keep doing, and doing it intentionally in terms of being clear on what the message is for that kind of change to happen, for us to get to a point where that is being celebrated for the beauty and for the art that it is, and not immediately being turned into, was it Vaseline or was it Nivea? I can't remember. It was Vaseline, yeah. This is sexual, pull it down, yeah.
Without saying what Jeff has said, I think it's a sociological question. The fact that sex and women tend to be restricted in their sexual expressions. Traditionally, that's why I said it's sociological. Traditionally, women are meant to be raised for marriage, right? So the restriction on sexual expression for women was as a result of that. Like, society wanted women to be restricted in their sexual expression because the men want to select women who they feel are sexually ready for marriage, essentially. So I think that's a vestige of our past that's carried on to date. And I think that then also affects how then women are viewed when communication is concerned. Because if I see Sheila Moniga on a billboard, a lot of men then feel uncomfortable because for them they're like, but she's supposed to be someone's mom or she's supposed to be someone's wife. Why is she fully undressed, you know? But for men, on the other hand, us expressing our sexuality or our sexual desires or our sexual needs and wants is almost expected, you know? That's why, sorry, you're making anyone uncomfortable. In a relationship, it's the man who's always expected to make sexual advances. The expectation is there, right? So I think it's a sociological question that then supersedes what we can do in advertising. And of course, advertising has the power to change how society thinks. And the Sheila Moniga example was a good way to start. If we saw 5 Sheila Monigas in a year, in 2 years' time, we'd be used to it, you know. Then suddenly, it's not such a strange idea that you have a Sheila Moniga happening. But also something that I think Shonak is one of the creative partners at the bar. Something that he also said to transcend the conversation is it's not just sex that sells, it's difference, you know. When you do something different, people pay attention, like what Mwambu was saying. People tend to pack up and listen, right? In a society that sex is repressed generally by society, when you do anything sexual, people pay attention because it's not what they're used to, because we've traditionally tended not to show anything sexual in most cases. But also, on the other hand, going back to the question which I didn't get a chance to answer, the moral grandstanding, we are hypocrites as Kenyans, to be honest. How many times do you drive in Kilimani and see massage with a curvaceous lady, right? I've never seen anyone write thesis on LinkedIn about that, right? And I think for me, that's more sexual than anything that Furniture Palace did. Like, it's very directly probably saying what you're going to expect. So I think as a society also needs, and it has to start in these rooms, we need to shed the hypocrisy of how we've been raised to be. Sex is an amazing thing, right? But like I said, if you're doing it in a classy way, like Emuron said, if you're doing it in a disciplined way, if you're doing it in a what Jeff said, you're teasing your audience, you're building a story around it. What Wamboy said, it's a beautiful thing to experience. So I would like us to see different ways of experiencing that without having to feel like we are talking from both sides of our mouths.
And is there any line that we must not cross? And maybe we can start with you, Wamboy.
I'm not sure if there's any line we should not cross, but I think my view is a little bit, I don't know if it's the same or it's different, but I think right now in the space that we're in East Africa, what has happened is that we have fetishized the female body and not the male body. So I'll give you an example. If you look at the ads that Calvin Klein is putting out, what Emuron was referencing, they had a big ad that came out, I think at the beginning of the year in December, with this actor, Jeremy, exactly. And then you also had Hugo Boss with David Beckham, right? And you have these guys, beautiful, six-pack. Whether it's padded or not, we don't know, right? But all these ads are busy winning awards, right? But where they are as a society is they're focusing on the male form right now. We are still arguably stuck on the female form. And like he was saying, we want her represented in, I don't know, like covered, yeah? Because that's what, unfortunately, we have. For me, it's a fetish. You want to see a woman covered 24/7, and it's like, it's not the reality. So for me, the question should be, how do we move from focusing on a woman's body to us being able to show, like he was saying, look at it as art. And we're talking about both the female form and the male form.
Okay, 100%.
100%.
No, how do we get there is a great question. And a question I have for Emuron is on something you've said previously on the medium where we show something is important. And does the different mediums we have, because we've talked a lot about billboards, TVCs only clearly that passed, but like given the different mediums, how do we get even that client buy-in? How do we get more wild work out there? And how do we get that buy-in so that we get this conversation to a point where if we see Sleep with Terry in 2 to 5 years, there's no one bats an eyelid and says we're on the wrong.
So I think it's less about the medium, to be honest, and more about the storytelling. Because again, any form of communication, advertising, the magic lies in the storytelling and how you do it. So it's not even about the packaging matters. That's why there's craft awards. But the main thing, I don't think it's a visual, whether it's an experience, whether it's actually a film and it's or a billboard, it's the story that you're telling and the beauty of that story. And then whether there's sex in it or not, it's about, does the sex actually fit in that particular story? So it's about the story that you tell, and it's about how you use the platform. Because the fact is, when you look at a lot of research, if you look at I think there was 2021 Gen Z report, Wonderman Thompson and Vice Media. What was the issue of that sexualization without meaning? So it wasn't that there was sexualization as the issue. It's one being overt about it. So again, we're not out there trying to show nudes on public platforms. There's private platforms for that. There's an entire industry that's larger than Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania's GDP that exists for that. But in our case, it's about understanding the category, for example. So if you're looking at platform, I think category matters more. There's some things that you're not ideally going to be selling with sex, because things like underwear kind of make sense, because underwear, if you're seeing someone's underwear, I'm just saying, there's a high probability that sex is not far from the equation. But if there's particular things that you're selling that make no sense, like, to be honest, the link between Furniture Palace and the beds and sex, a bed and sex, there's a correlation. But if you're out there selling brooms with sex, you're like, homie, what's going on? And going your question around women and men and the sexualization of women, when we're talking about the sexualization of women, and in comparison to men, why is it that a sexualization of a male figure is more tolerated than the sexualization of a female figure? It's simple, or simply the fact that for decades, actually not decades, for centuries now, women have been unfairly objectified and commoditized in that way. So society has spent a long time trying to correct this objectification and sexualization and commoditizing of female sex. So then when you in advertising come and use your massive media platform to then try and disrespect a lot of the work that's been put forward to create a society whereby there's proper respectful representation of women, society will frown upon that. So that's one of the reasons why a man with a bare chest or flexing his sexuality will be more tolerated by society than if the same is being done for women. But yeah, to answer your question, it's really not the platform, it's the category and the story that you're telling.
One thing, as we go into the future, cultural attitudes, and I think this is for both of you, cultural attitudes are changing, and we're there. I forgot about my mic. Cultural attitudes are changing and evolving. So where do you see in the next couple of years the use of sex and sexual appeal in these ads? And how do we make sure that, what are the ROIs, KPIs we can talk to our clients and make sure they buy in?
So I think looking into the future and looking at the generation that's coming after us, particularly Gen Zs and Gen Alphas, for them, their viewpoint is very globalized. Unlike us, they see global first from a, I'd say, cultural perspective, and then find their rooting in it. If TikTok is anything to go by, they are highly expressive. They are expressing themselves in music, in dance, in art. I'm seeing us going back to a situation where you know those paintings on the Sistine Chapel, where it's the David statue fully nude. You know, the Sistine Chapel where the guys are fully nude and they are trying to touch God and stuff. I see that generation appreciating that form of expression even more. And with the AI happening, it's making ephemeral communication more useful. You know, it's giving it more value. So my prediction is, with an open-minded generation, with a more connected generation, with a more appreciation for what humanity can create, including what our bodies can create, I think we'll start appreciating the human form more and more. So whether it tends to lead us down this path, I don't know, but I feel like that we'll end up appreciating what Wambo is saying, appreciating both the manly form and the womanly form, and that appreciation will come from a need for something that we haven't seen in a long time, you know. And because humanity is always cyclic, that for me is what I'm seeing happening. Like we'll tend to shed the fear we have of who we are, of our bodies, our vessels, and appreciate what our vessels can do because it's something we haven't seen in generations. So that's my prediction. Yeah.
So actually, I just like to discuss channel selection because I have a different viewpoint from Emuron. I do think that channel selection matters, yeah, and I think it cuts also across categories in terms of industry, yeah. So I'll just use the example of TikTok. A lot of the content that we get in Kenya, in East Africa, on TikTok, it's highly sexualized across all industries, music, fashion, even our own advertising stuff that we do for our own clients, because we get influencers who then sexualize the brand for us. That's their role, so that you can kind of say, okay, I didn't do this stuff myself. It's the influencer. They didn't understand the brief in case it backfires, right? But putting up a billboard, okay, so yesterday I got served this ad on TikTok. It's this lady, she owns a brand called TT, yeah? So she's selling bras, mobile. She's got a nice little mobile shop that she started. It starts off with her pulling the truck, and she's curvaceous, she's in a beautiful bra. You pan to the driver. The driver is a lady, just as curvaceous, in a bra only, literally. Like, and I'm talking about big boobs, like triple F. Like, they're huge. I mean, it's a titty thing, yeah. But if I saw a billboard in, I don't know, along Wayaki Way, imagine it would be pulled down tomorrow. In fact, immediately. But on TikTok, it's running with at least, as of yesterday, 15K views. Yeah. So I think even like if we look at even a brand like Durex, yeah, where do they activate? They activate below the line, right? So every now and then they'll come out to bars and they'll have the little coasters that everyone wants to steal. But, you know, putting up a billboard or running a radio ad like consistently, it's not something that they would typically do. So I think there's space across different categories for sexualization to be permitted. So we'll permit it in fashion, we'll permit it music, but not necessarily in, you know, in cooking oil. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I know the ad Jeff is talking about came back to me.
There's one more point I've actually remembered for the generations coming after us as well. I think they are reaching back to the African roots a bit more, right? I don't know if any of you have watched Shaka Ilembe. It's on Showmax. You love it, yeah? I love it to bits. Yes. If you haven't watched it, go watch it. So in Shaka Ilembe, it's a representation of how Shaka Zulu came to be, right? And it's a historical representation of how that story happened, including how they would dress, right? So the appreciation that the generations after us are having for our African roots is one more reason why I feel they'll go back to that. Because they'll be like, if 4 generations ago, they were walking topless. Actually, in SA, they're already doing it. When they are doing their festivals, they walk around topless, right? Yeah. And for them, it's accepted because it's a cultural reality. They were like, actually, we used to do this. So for them, someone being topless and being a woman doesn't raise any eyebrows, you know? For Kenyans, they'll be there on TikTok wondering, hey, you know? But for SA, so I think that cultural appreciation by the generations after us is another reason why the idea of teasing sex and coming down to it might happen down the line.
I don't know if you have anything to add on that, Jeff, before I ask you.
On the predictions part. I like what Jaggi said about the population we have now. So currently, the population of Kenya, young people 18 and below, make up around 40-something% of the total Kenyan population. So by 2030, you can imagine what that will be looking like in terms of your 18 to 34 bracket. So all this to say is sex is no longer the big bad wolf it used to be. It's no longer the thing that we would program with comms on abstain, be faithful, use a condom. And we're seeing that even in terms of the feedback we're getting on the scripts themselves from young people. Like, this is so basic. Who talks like this? Who talks about sex like this? So all that to say that for us as communicators, as storytellers, advertisers, all that, what will change is if we will be working on brands that have never played in that space before and would like to play in that space before, the bar is so much higher. The expectation is so much higher. The bullshit radar is so much higher. These young people will clock it before you even have a chance to get that ad out there a number of times. So it's the call to us is bravery, yes, but also doing that intentional and often very hard work of finding the nuances that make sex sell and not flop. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if Emuron, you have anything to add on where sex and advertising will be in 5 years before I open it up to you guys for anyone who has any questions.
As Jaggi said something key, we'll keep moving in these cycles, right? So over a period of time, there's going to be things that will become more acceptable. Over a period of time, maybe a decade down the line, everyone will become prudes and be more pious and more religious. So we'll just keep moving around in these particular cycles. The one thing is advertising, usually successful advertising holds up a mirror to society. And many times society doesn't want to see its reflection in that mirror. Advertising and sex will not be separated. They coexist. I think what will be key and what is going to be important for all advertisers in the room is understanding that that relationship is not supposed to be a forced relationship. As we're all aware, forced sex is not great sex. So it's not supposed to be a forced relationship. What will have to be, you only use sex in advertising when it makes sense. When it makes sense for the brand, when it makes sense for the platform, when it makes sense for that particular bit of communication you're trying to put out there. What I'd also say is do not stay away from it because of fear. I think one of the worst things that can happen to any creative mind or any communicator is to exist in a world where you're afraid to do what you think is right because of potential backlash and because of what could potentially happen. You have to be able to take those risks. And if part of that risk is doing a campaign or an ad or a piece of content in which sex is involved, then you go ahead and do that. But of course, with every risk that you take, you have to be ready for the consequences. You could be very, very wrong, or you could completely misapply it, or your moral grand standards could just show up and totally decimate you. But that's fine. That's part of the journey of creative growth. That's part of the journey we have to take as an industry. So sex is going to be there. We're not going to avoid it. Sex is part of who we are as a species. And as people who borrow all our inspiration for what we do from people, we're going to find ourselves in situations where sometimes that inspiration that we get from society to do a bit of communication is going to be sexual in nature. But what it shouldn't be is forced. What it shouldn't be is because sex sells, let me just only use sex. So yeah, it is going to exist. How we shape that relationship with advertising is up to us really as an industry. And I think that's why we're here having this discussion.
All right. On that bombshell, we can give a hand to our panelists before we go to questions. Name and question, please.
Yes, my name is Andrew Balongo Pere, and I have two ideas I'd like you guys to riff up on. The first one is, what is the real cultural identity around sex? Is it ours, or is this just the city version? Because when you go to shags, we can see the sexual attitude is different. And, just how different tribes treat sex, right? So I notice even what we say we are doing in the city, I would say is not even Kenyan. We've inherited from Victorian white people repressing sex, because we can see even, I can't even watch The Crown, just seeing how it's so stuffy, people can't express themselves. Yet, that's the engine, that's how we are behaving in the city. And even I juxtapose it again with people up country, the sexual attitude is so different. And even Jackie said, South Africa, you see, that's cultural. You see, when you say cultural, that's people who are not ruled by white people's opinion. Us, we are doing what we used to do. So my question is, because we don't have a clear identity, even look in church, people don't even explore Songs of Solomon. We don't even have poetry for sensuality. We don't have poetry. We don't even have things like tantra or tantric. We're learning from different cultures. And I don't mind learning from different cultures. Hence my question. What is our real cultural identity? Are we really exploring to say, what is really sex and how can it be communicated? That's the first question. The second question is what you mentioned about balance. What is the female expression of sex? I'm not seeing it even in terms of words, expression, whether we like fight guys, thin guys, dark, light-skinned. I don't see any expression, whether it's offline or, if I go to groups, it'll just be relegated to romantic novels and thirsting, and that's it over there. How the stories were crafted, but not real expression from the Kenyan women themselves. How it looks visually, how it looks like in words. So if it's not expressed in the culture, then how can you even navigate the female version of how it looks like? Thank you. I'd like, all of your responses to that.
I'll start with your second question. As East African women, there's a lot of cultural repression, and that means we are sexually repressed, we are financially repressed, however you want to look at it, because we have, for a very long time, we haven't been empowered with the courage to speak about what our preferences are. Okay, these days they call it the eldest daughter syndrome, yeah? But a lot of women suffer from it. You are consistently told your job is to take care of your husband. If it's not your husband, it's your brother, it's somebody's son. Like, that's what has always taken precedence, yeah? In terms of Kenyan women, your first question, or East African women and what their sexual preferences are, I'm going to encourage you to expand your social media content reach because that content exists, especially on TikTok, especially on Instagram. It requires you to be a little bit more open in terms of your perspective on what content women are actually consuming, because honestly, on TikTok there's a lot of conversation around up and coming authors who are Kenyan, who are Ugandan, who speak, or who a lot of their literature is based on exploring women's interests sexually and how women can be pleasured. Even Somali TikTok, actually, by the way, to be honest, a lot of it is how do we make sure that this woman who's almost always covered up is getting pleasure from both her man and other sources. Yeah. That's my take.
I had to take notes for this question. So I was telling someone the other day, this is a hypothesis I have. When people are financially repressed, they tend to lean more on their romantic end. Because when you don't have money, the one thing you have, or the one thing you want to feel loved. Because you don't have the money to make you feel loved, you have to look for someone to make you feel loved, right? So when you can't get financial empowerment, you look for emotional satisfaction. So one theory I have is with inflation, with financial depression, I think sex gains more significance, because in that case you want to feel valued as a human being. And since the money can't take you to Diani, I wish someone can love me, you know? That's why I think R&B events are becoming a thing all of a sudden. That's my hypothesis. Going back to culture, in my culture, I've been lucky, maybe privileged, to grow up being able to interact with my culture. There's something we call Uthi. Uthi is nighttime dances. Usually when circumcision has happened, people will go at night and they're dancing. One of the dances is a very sexual dance, but it's sexual in the way of seducing. I'm not the best dancer, but how they do it. So a guy will stand, and there's a lady on the opposite end, and the dance usually involves the guy moving towards the lady, and then the lady moves towards the guy, and it's like, they do that back and forth for like 20, 30 times, right? That's the whole dance, essentially. And like I was saying, I think with the younger generation exploring their cultures more, them discovering how Africans explored sexuality will allow them to find new ways then of expressing our sexuality and sex in general. And then finally, I think religiosity is decreasing in general, right? The reason rural areas in Kenya are highly sexually repressed is because of Christianity and other religions in general, other Western and other foreign religions in general, which, like you rightfully said, have tended to repress sex, the idea of sex. But fun fact, the story of Adam and Eve is actually about sex. It's not about apples and snakes, right? I think the way the West interpreted religion is how we took it, and unfortunately it has ended up with us repressing our sexuality when that was never the intention. There's a whole book, like you said, Songs of Solomon is nothing but about love and sex. So I think with the decrease in Christianity in general, the younger generation then will tend to find new ways of expressing themselves that do not involve what their parents did or what their grandparents did, which will probably lead them down a path of now expressing themselves across their different facets of life, including sex and sexuality. Yeah.
No, I think Jaggi has actually captured it, because what I wanted to answer was just that one on cultural identity. I'm not sure if we have a shared cultural identity on the idea of sex. I think your question is loaded. It's a historical question. It's a question about colonialism. It's a heavy question. So I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of beautiful, rich stuff about our cultural identity where sex is concerned that might be lost to history. I love what you said around young people now starting to explore and discover it. So maybe in the next 20 years, what we would call our shared cultural identity where sex is concerned will look like an amalgamation of what, the history they've learned, immersing themselves into where they've come from, but also genuinely what they've grown up in the age of understanding consent and what that means and all these other issues. And yeah, so what is our current sexual cultural identity? I don't know if we have one, but is one forming? Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so on the two questions, I think I'll leave the question about female expression of sex respectfully to the females. I have a point of view on that, but then I think I don't want to be the guy out there explaining a female point of view. I want to talk about the identity thing, and I think the problem is significantly more deep-seated. The truth is, Andrew, and I think we've had this discussion before, cannot avoid Western influence, and that's facts. The industry that we operate in borrows a lot of best practices and learnings from the rest of the world, and mostly the Western world, as supposedly that's the gold standard. If you look at places like India, Thailand, they're starting to figure out what their identity is. But that also stems from the fact that culturally, a lot of their cultural identity is still strong. If you look at one of the most culturally strong countries on the continent, which is us here in Kenya, the reality is we still look at something like Sai Shuko, for example, as a representation of our identity, but that's basically a Scottish kilt, was never initially even Kenyan. If you look at the continent in its entirety, I think one of the visual representations of our culture, also in the way we dress, is what would see coming out of West Africa. And a lot of, and some parts, West Africa, some parts of the Congo, if you look at the Kitenge, but the Kitenge is also Asian. So we cannot avoid Western influence. On a lot of these things will shape our identity until we figure out what our actual cultural identity is.
Yeah, so I think one of the most interesting things I've heard today is the channel and what's the other thing? The conversation around pretty much how you storytell and ideally the category of the product you're trying to sell. Now, when I came here, I was thinking about 3 ads, yeah? So the first one was the clean it one, what sucks most. And then there's what your team did, the Furniture Palace one. But then there's a third one, quite interesting. So there is Quickie Car Insurance by Liaison. Ideally, those guys are selling brooms with sex. Yeah? I find that quite interesting. And amongst the 3, that one is still live. And the conversations I've seen online pretty much are positive to the storytelling they've done there. Now my question, what's that thing that they did? Yeah, is it instinctive? Because I believe all of the 3 are very clever, yeah, in terms of like the approach, the storytelling, yeah, and even like sort of stepping out of the category to sell brooms with sex, yeah. What is that thing that they did there? And is there a formula to that? Or is it just instinctive?
I think what they did is one thing that sex does, or the implication of sex, it shortcuts thinking, right? If I see a quickie, I already know what I'm being told. I don't need explanations. I don't need a paragraph. You see Quickie Car Insurance, Max knows these clients very well, and maybe he can get some insights after this on how they are selling, but I suspect they are selling well. That's why the billboard is still up. But you see a Quickie Car Insurance, you get it. So I think for me, what they did is they basically found a device to shortcut your thinking. They don't need to explain how the car insurance works in 3 minutes. It's a quickie. That's what it is. Yeah.
Very specific on the 3 minutes.
Yeah, but I think part of the reason why those ads are genuinely working is they've actually separated the visual versus the copy. Yeah. So the copy is witty, it's direct, yeah, and the visual is not, it's not overtly sexual. It isn't, yeah. So if you look at all the other examples that you've given, so like Furniture Palace, sorry, Terry, bed, automatically your mind goes straight to, it's an insinuation, it's innuendo, but here you're seeing copy, like with liaison, right? You see quickie, and then you just see people in a car and they're just looking at each other. So now you, if you're doing other things, that's you, it's not them. Like they've said, there's quick, again, there's that whole concept of being able to quickly push it away from the brand should you have something that you feel is dodgy. So if you look at, I guess your question was around channel selection, but if you're able to, if you fine-tuned your craft where you're able to distinguish between the copy and the art, you can get away with almost anything.
It's like almost like basic brand strategy. Number one, we're always selling to your basic need, right? We sell to your head, to your heart, to your stomach, and to your genitals. Yeah. And you think of all the companies that are making it right now, they answer one basic thing: is Google and ChatGPT answer the question that your head has, right? You ask it questions and you get a logical answer. Your heart is your Facebook, your Instagram, your TikTok. It gives you places to connect, right? Your stomach, consumption abilities, that's your Jumia, your Amazon, anywhere that you go and it feels your consumption behavior. And finally, there is your groin and your genitals. That's the space that Apple, Tesla, and now soon Akina, they're called who? The insurance, the liaison insurance, the Furniture Palace are playing in. Anyone who sort of looks like they're speaking to your ability to procreate is selling. Because actually the world is in need of that. The species is in threat of being removed by a weird virus from China, etc. Yeah? But everyone is doing that. So it's a formula, it works. They know why they're doing it. Of course, it's clever copy. Like, I like the work from Furniture Palace, personally. It's direct, it creates conversation. I like the quickie work as well, because I can get the humor around it. But also at the end of it is you're answering a genital question, like quickies associated by sex. I can see why that memory, what Njagi was talking about, that memory structure is already formed. And that is what, marketers, creative people are doing.
Hi everyone, my name is Emily. I am an influencer manager, and my motivation coming here is hearing from the people who create the assets I interact with. Actually, let me correct it. I'm an influencer and social media manager. So throughout my career, especially on the social media side, the assets that you create for billboards are the ones that we typically use on digital, right? So it's cool hearing from you guys, especially in this particular topic. And while all of you were talking, I was actually thinking about how for the longest time, billboards act as a representation of, I don't know how to call it, the vibe of the region that you're in. So think about it this way. So you're in Nairobi, everything is bright and vibrant. I go to, let's say, here in Westi, and it's billboards about booze. And then kidogo kidogo, nkishuka hivi Chiromo, a bit of insurance, Furniture Palace. If I go into rural areas, it's MCAs, vote for me, right? And maybe Modokinjo, and maybe I don't know what else. So it's billboards and also radio, kitambo, before frequency became really good in most places, acted as a representation of, this is how modern this place is, this is how well set up this place is. So that's something interesting I thought I'd say. But then now my question is, right now we're talking sex, and sex is part of human nature. It's a part of nature in general. And for humanity, there are also other things. There's religion. And I remember this billboard, I don't know if it's still up here along Westlands, but I don't know if it's by GA. And it's a very minimalistic billboard. They have this like line illustration of a mountain, and it's like, we take care of, I don't know, this, and then he takes care of the rest. And I thought, okay, I'm a Christian, but I thought, is this supposed to be here? Isn't this a neutral establishment when you think about it from a religious perspective? Isn't it pushing it a bit when you're aligning yourself with this particular religion? Thought about it that way. And then also thinking about the fact that I've worked with brands, and a lot of them are family brands, but then it's always a gray area. So I worked with a brand along Wayakiwe, a green one, and conversations with the PR team were always being careful about how we want to be perceived in media. But then when you think about the influencer executions I do for this particular family brand, is engage musicians, for example, who are, the songs are suggestive. So where do we draw the line? And again, briefs used to come in with, we need innovation, we need something exciting. But what is exciting? So I think it's still something that needs to be explored, the conversation about sexuality, about conversations that are actually relevant. It's not just sex. There was an issue with, again, that particular brand and another brand that brought in a product that was like, don't go for those, you know what I'm talking about. So where is the line drawn? Where do we actually call out the people who are on LinkedIn and are like, okay, I didn't like this billboard because it said, yeah, so where does the grandstanding start and where does it stop? I know it's something we're talking about here, but I just wanted to ask again.
Figuring out that line is a case by case forever when you're in the career type of thing, because as I think Emuron had mentioned it earlier, sometimes you are at the whims of public opinion of the day. What is considered acceptable today might have read very differently 10 years ago, right? So there's that. I think there's some general guardrails in terms of what's considered decent, which again is determined by the space you're playing in, the audience you're speaking to. So I mean, I don't know. I think that line, you're constantly studying it based on your brief, based on your campaign. Yeah.
Okay, let me start with family brands. Families are not created through osmosis. And you must consistently, let me tell you, remind those people that families are not created through osmosis, photosynthesis. You must have sex, okay? Regardless. Religion is never going to go away. So what you need to do is what he's talking about. You have to figure out, how do I circumnavigate it? Am I jumping over it? Am I addressing the issue direct, or am I going around it, under it? You have to figure out the space at which your client is most comfortable. Yeah. So those people on that road, yeah, they like to go around or under. Yeah. So unfortunately, that's it. You cannot force them to go through it. Yeah. There are other brands on another big road that like to go through it. Yeah. Along Thika Road. Yeah, those ones like to go through it, yeah, not under over. But it's, again, look at your client's appetite for risk, yeah. And then again, you are the influencer / content creator. What do they like saying nowadays? We are partners, yeah. That's the role you have to take, yeah. So again, look at the appetite for risk, and you as your own brand, or looking at the influencers you're working with, what does their brand speak for, and how does it tie back together with the initial brand? It's always going to be uncomfortable. You know, everyone wants to think that sex is not going to sell their product, but almost always, yeah, even the church, yeah, they use sex to get us to think a certain way. They get to mold our identity, as was being mentioned earlier. No one can escape it. So it's Yeah, it's here to stay. So you just have to get comfortable with it, I reckon.
I think from the jump, one would easily say completely avoid sex in that case. But then as was aptly said, sex is part of society, sex is part of life. So in this case, if a brand wants to be innovative and explorative and you feel there is a part that sex is going to either show up into the conversation or a time that it will have a role to play, I think you have to set the ground rules from the get-go. Just like when people are engaging in sexual activity, there's safe words, there's decisions on what their preferences are and what is on the table and what isn't. And I think that's a discussion you have to have with them up front. So you're very clear about what is and what isn't going to happen in regards to that brand's relationship with sex. Understanding as well that sex evolves. Sex is a very dynamic beast, a very dynamic animal. So if you're going to have a long-term relationship, let's assume this is a client you have a 5+ year relationship with, you'll have to keep having a refresher on that conversation to understand where there's changes in their appetite, where there's changes in their preferences. So either completely avoid it or set the ground rules up front and have your safe words, have your preferences on the table. Let it be known.
With that being said, let's give a hand to our lovely panel.